Hello, welcome to my studio. Well, welcome to my studio digitally, I guess. For those of you who've been here before, either in person or via video, you know this is this small part of my studio where I do design work and preparations for matting and framing, as well as an awful lot of the watercolor on paper work that I will be doing almost all the time. The other part of my studio I use for larger watercolors and for big drawings and that sort of thing. But the purpose of this particular visit for you guys is to prep you for a little short video that I did in class about 6 or 7 days ago, showing the layering techniques for using very old school traditional styles of watercolor layering versus a single layer method, and then a hybrid version of that. So we'll jump right on in and take a look at the video that I took. You'll have comments from the actual class to listen to a bit, and I'll probably do some voiceover on that as well. Again, welcome, and hope you enjoy. Take care. Okay, so what we're going to be doing tonight, since you saw pictures like this on your table, those are for you to play with. Now you guys have seen me draw before. I tend to draw with a lot of sort of quick gesture stuff, and then I'll clean it up. I'm looking at this one and going, wow, that really needs to be that line right there. But all I'm doing here is I'm just going to show you two basic techniques. Two strategies for doing this to make something have some light and dark quality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up value, lights and darks. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about value today. What am I going to do? Okay, so what I'm going to do is this one. This one is going to be based, this is a very traditional one, and I'm going to go ahead and label it that way. It's traditional. Most traditional approach. And this one is a more modern approach, or it's a more simple, it's a simpler approach. Simpler approach. Okay? I guess it's simpler, but you'll see they each have advantages. That's what you need to know. They each have some advantages. What am I going to do? They're big enough I could do it. Yes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a full set of values on both of these. Yeah. Use a green, not because it's a magical color by any stretch of the imagination. So, I'm ready to get started, but I have to make a decision first. I'm going to try to show you these boxes, casting a shadow, like there's light on them, okay? So I need to decide where the light's coming from, so I know what the lightest surface will be. So if I say this is the lightest surface on the box, the light's coming from overhead. If this is the lightest surface on the box, you know the shadow's going, you can see the shadow off the side. So it would either be here or here, right? If it's coming from an angle down onto here, this might be the lightest, or this might be the lightest, and then whichever other one is probably the second lightest, okay? So if I say this side is the lightest, you know what I'm going to do with that? I'm going to leave it white. It's the lightest surface, okay? So if this is the lightest surface, this will be a little darker, this will be darker still, the shadow will be probably the darkest place. The background will probably be darker because it's not, anyway, so let's say this is the lightest one. So I'm going to leave that one completely white. Leave that one completely white. In this traditional approach, I'm going to use the same color, the same value over and over and over again, and I'm going to build it up in layers. This is the lightest one, so guess what? That means absolutely everything here will get the same green. The front surface is the only thing that isn't going to get painted. Paint everything in, all at once. Does this make sense so far?
It's like a layer.
I'm doing it by layers.
Yeah.
And I'm going, now I could work wet into wet, but this traditional approach is you let that dry. Don't mess with anything else, let that dry.
How long does that take usually?
Depends on the weather. Depends on the humidity of the air. Depends on the what kind of paper you've got, how much water you used. This time of year, it's a little slow, but probably 5 or 10 minutes. Now, this is going to be the lightest thing, so it's going to stay white, okay? But I'm saying it's sort of in the front and overhead, so that this layer right here, I'm going to put more darks on other places. So I'm going to show you what this one is different. This one is about putting the color in one time only. This is, I touch the paper once for that color. Done. Leaving that one's leaving it as it is. Okay? 0. So, what's next? What's next for this one? Well, let's need an area that's darker. Well, if this, whatever this is actually, whatever this is a surface that's parallel to it. That surface that's parallel to it will be the same value. Now, you might say, but if this is a black tabletop and this is a white box, this will be lighter than this one will be. Yes, that is absolutely true. But leaving aside the what's called the local color, the local value of the object, the amount of light being bounced off of that surface and the amount of light being bounced off of this surface will be identical. And if they were the same color, they would leave the same value. So, same thing there. This is this surface right here. Let's just go ahead and get it in. Now I'm not going to do the shadow. This is a different value. Don't worry about it being perfect. I'm not going to worry about it being perfect, and if I can get away with that. So now I've got the two surfaces that are basically the same value, they're done. You might think, well, is this ready? I can feel coolness in the paper. I'm trying to press it hard because it's wet enough that I can leave a fingerprint in the color. So what happens next? Well, this one, whatever's the next darkest thing, well, if this is fairly light, but it's turned at a different angle from this one, this one's this way. This one, if this is darker, that's probably the next thing to do. Now, the problem with, you're going to see immediately the problem this is going to have. What happens when I get my wet paint that I'm putting down now next to that damp piece of paper? There's going to be a bleed if I'm not careful, right? So the way around that is you let everything dry, or you leave a slight white space. Remember when I was saying that's not a bad thing to try when you're working? When we were just making marks? Remember that? The idea of leaving some white space between your areas. So if this is a little darker, it's the background. Be careful, John. Okay.
Now, in some ways, it's simpler because we're not building up layers. I said this one was the traditional one. This is not untraditional for people who are not trying to paint realistically. It's just, you put the colors in where you want them, right? It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Put them in. Let it dry. Well, maybe that's a little too light right there. Okay, I can add a little color in there. See, I'm not worrying about it being super even. I'm not worried about it being flat. It's not wet, but I can feel the coolness in the paper, which means it's not also dry. So I'm going to wait just one more. I'm 2/3 done here.
It looks like you have a lighter green and a darker green underneath, is
Yeah,
that right?
each layer is a different value. Whereas this one's going to be the same value over and over and over again. So each time we do it, we get a little darker. Now this section is mostly dry. That's not so much dry. But this is the next darkest. So we're just going to lay it in. Oops. I might, ooh, bad, look. Bad, John, bad. How do I get rid of that? Oh no. I'm being clumsy all day today. Apparently it's going to keep going even if you paint it. Okay, so I'm not sure this is darker than that layer back there.
It's like a different color green.
It's a slightly different green, some more yellowy green, isn't it?
Yeah.
Guess what? That's easily taken care of. There we go. Now it's really wet. I'm in trouble if I knock into something else. Okay.
The more wet you have it, does it blend?
Say that again?
Like if you have it, if it's more wet on your paper,
The
can you
colors-
blend it easier?
Yes.
Like, okay.
Yeah. If there's wet up against wet, it can blend it itself on its own. So now I need to go to my shadow. Now shadows tend to be darker than anything else in your picture, at least the core of the shadow. We've seen that, the idea that sometimes shadows are soft and very subtle on the outside edges. But the thing is, where light is supposed to get to, and it can't, that ends up being mostly the darkest thing you've got. At least the middle of that shadow. And then right up against the surface of something that it's casting the shadow, that's where it's the darkest of the darkest of the dark. But yeah, we gotta get darker still here. Now this is dangerous because this is wet. This is very wet. So how am I going to get there? Well, maybe I need to wait, or maybe I just simply need to be really careful. And I was having trouble being careful a minute ago. You come in, get close. Now you might be thinking, but what is this white line going to do in the end? We can play with that afterwards. Man, that's a lot bluer than it probably should be. Yellow one in here. How about both of those? I need to be darker, not quite so blue. I'll leave the wet where it is. Oh, snap. I'm really close. You were asking about if it's wetter, will it blend? Yeah, see what I'm doing here? And so I'm actually bringing the wet paint in where I've got it ahead of time. It's running back into that little wet spot that I left. You know, I'm going to be really careful here. just getting really close. I don't want it to run into that other section now. And then here's the front edge of that shadow. Okay, so now I've got a shadow. Little white spots in it and some edges. We've got some little edges we're going to play with afterwards. Yeah, that's dry enough now. See the advantage of this one? It's simple and it's almost done. You might think, well, then what's the advantage of this one? Well, for some folks, it's slower. Is that better? Maybe. Maybe not. So what I need is the next value, which is this one, right? The background. What I need, though, is I need it to be basically the same as it was a minute ago, so I'm going to have to lighten it. Now, what I'm going to do is I need this, but what it is I need, this is darker, and this is darker, right? This and this are the next lightest things after this. So what I've got to paint is the background, and this, and the shadow. So I bring in an extra layer right now. So what might the advantage of this one be?
You get like more seamless edges and stuff.
Yes. That's the thing. You get it's going to be more coherent. The pieces will fit together in layers, not like a jigsaw puzzle, but instead the background and the object will all be of a piece.
You mentioned last week, talking about the washes, that you don't want to touch your brush in the paper so that you can't first start pulling it out.
Right.
Is that a concern here?
A little bit, but I'm trying to fill in the space as quickly as I can with as few marks as I can. But yeah,
You're saying not touch your brush too many times?
not touching the paper too many times, particularly in the same area. You don't want to get to the point where you've done it 4 or 5, 6 times in one space. 2 or 3, not so much of a problem, but more than that, you really don't want to go too much more because you really do want it to be.
Even if it dries in between.
If you let it completely dry, you're okay. See, this is damp, but all I'm doing is I'm trying to sort of even it out a little bit. But notice I'm not going back and getting it wet again and wet again. I'm just trying to do it fairly quick, get a fairly even coat here. Yeah, if you let it dry completely out in between, you're all right. You can touch it 1,000 times with 1,000 layers. But what happens is if you touch it 5, 10, 15 times while it's still one wetness, every time you're touching the paper, you're stirring up the dust on the top of the paper. You're stirring up the pigment that was trying to settle in, and it's stirring it up, and then it's bringing paper fibers up into the paint, which is going to make it more cloudy and less transparent.
So sometimes you probably do that on purpose, right?
Yeah, if you want a messy looking surface. Sometimes it's fun to do a muddy, messy surface. Don't tell that to the Transparent Watercolor Society of America members because they think everything should be clean and fresh and beautiful and pristine. But they're getting away from that a little bit. They're a little bit over the top about a lot of things. Here's the funny thing. I don't care how damp it is outside. It's usually going to be that same dampness on the inside, but the air's not moving in here like it does outside. It could be raining outside and you can set and it'll dry faster outside than it'll dry inside the room. Because it's more about not the heat, it's more about moving air, picking up the water and moving it out. So I'm going to go ahead and go for this now. The next layer. Remember now I got to get this darker and I got to get this darker. So I'm coming back in here. Realizing I have a real drawing mistake in here, but that's okay. Got to get it darker. Let's speed this up by getting a. Normally I would actually do this in layers that were exactly the same value all the time. And speed it up by getting this little layer a little darker faster. And again, I'm doing the whole shape.
Is there an advantage to using exactly the same value?
Well, it's just stepping up one step at a time. It's very careful. It's very methodical, and you can make all kinds of. I'm doing this very quickly as though each side is perfectly flat and even. But if you were doing this and looking at something, you'd find that there's an extra darkness down here and this on this side, and there'd be an extra darkness really close in, and in the middle of the shadow. So I'm simplifying this a lot. But if you were really let's say you weren't just doing a cube, you're doing something that's got 6 or 7 sides to it and some curved edges. Multiple values allow you to play with it. The email that I sent you had a photograph of somebody had done an apple with gray. I don't know if you remember that one. They did that with about 7 or 8 values. They did it in steps from light to dark. So you can see I'm not dark enough yet. This is not dry, and it's lighter than this is here. So I'm going to need another value, at least one more value here, maybe 2. Whatever I put here, I'll put here as well. And then I'll keep getting darker and darker. Okay? So, this will be more holistic and will hold together better, but it's slower. It's more methodical. It's more careful. It's more Renaissance-y. Traditionalist. This is simpler, maybe more modern, or maybe more ancient as well. You think about it. The Renaissance was never about being simple. It was about making things hold together. The pieces have to hold. The center has to hold. More modern or older is like, let's just get it done. One that's simple way. And we'll get started with it. Will you finish it? Maybe, maybe not, because we want to move on and do some other stuff tonight. But it gets us started on this process of laying this in. This is a perfectly good way to work. This is a perfectly good way to work. Now watch. You should do this question. Which one do you use, John? You're going to love my answer. It's the same smart alecky answer that I use all the other time. Which one of these do I use? Yes. Yes. This one, and this one. Now this is a totally different way. This is a hybrid of these two. And you also might use wet on wet and wet on dry and dry brush and scraping and scoring and all those other techniques that we saw when we were looking at mark making and washes. So I'll play with that one. I'll come around and check on you guys in a second, but first I'm going to get my next layer.
Why don't people use watercolor? do they prefer pencil? Or is it just a both way?
Some people will use a watercolor pencil, like a yellow one, or a pale blue one, or a pale gray one. Others will literally do the same thing that an oil painter might do with a brush, and just a light version. I think one of the reasons that they do it like people doing it with a pencil, it is the traditional way of doing it from the, like the 1700s, when they first started inventing pencils. So I think part of that it just simply has to do with they're portable, they're easy to deal with, they're easy to erase.
That makes sense. It's just easy.
Sure. You can see where I've added the next layer here.
That's the layers, and then the second would be that, and then the bottom.
I'm trying to remember what each layer. The background is
You asking a question?
Is the background behind the cube, is that darker?
It was, yeah. Come over and take a look. See, it was a little, it was
Yeah,
dark.
so is this the same?
This was 0, 1, 2, 3, excuse me, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 0 layers of color, 1 layer of color, 2 layers of color, 3 layers of color, 4 layers of color. That's what you're doing over here.
Okay.
So 0, 1,
And then are these, just I forget, are these all four just increasingly darker?
Yes, these are
All put on at the same?
right. So if I were to do this one with the little color things, I would put a white square, a light square, a medium square, a dark square, and a very dark square.
Got it, okay.
Almost like the first one.
Yeah, it just needs an extra layer or two, or maybe two sometimes. All right, looks pretty good.